The hardest thing about making this video is coming up with a visual way to show you this really abstract idea about a summary. So a summary is obviously short, but you have to show your understanding in the mark scheme. So you're looking at a similarity or difference between two things. This is my visual metaphor. Source A, source B. It'll either be something that they've got in common or something that's different, and I will show you both. I've got like what it looks like on paper when I wrote my guide, but I want to do that later in the video. You probably won't even want to get that far. I don't know. Depends how brilliant I am at this. So I'm going to say something about source A and then use the word implies to give an explanation. Source A has a spout and is obviously designed for pouring. The large opening of the spout implies that this will be into a large cup or glass. Source B is also designed for pouring with a spout. The narrowness and delicate nature of the spout implies that it is for precision pouring into small or delicate cups. So now I have one comparison, an explanation about each one using the word implies. I now have my 2 marks. If I don't make the comparison, I don't get any marks for my explanations. And similarly, if I explain something that isn't compared, I don't get any marks. For example, this has a stamp showing that it is made in England, implying that it is probably quite cheap. I've got an explanation there. This has no stamp. I've got a comparison, but only one explanation. So I'm not really going to get any marks. A generous examiner might say, oh, I'll give you 1 mark for your comparison. But really, if you haven't got an explanation for each part of your comparison, forget it. So far I'm on 2 marks for talking about the spouts. Both source A and source B are decorated. The decoration on source A is not realistic to a fish. It is earth-coloured. This implies it is to remind the user that it is a piece of pottery to be used and therefore not delicate. The decoration on source B is more ornate with the patina. This implies that it is used on special occasions or only by adults. That was a quite long explanation, but still only 1 sentence. Okay, I now have 4 marks because I've made 2 comparisons with an implies in each part of the comparison. Let's get some more marks. The volume of source A is small. This implies that it is used to fill 1 or 2 big cups. The volume of liquid in source B is large in comparison to the spout. This implies that it is used to fill more cups of a delicate nature for a more ceremonial drink. 2 implies in my comparison, 2 marks. I've got 6 so far, I just need 1 more comparison. The handle on source A is designed humorously and cannot be gripped easily by an adult hand. This implies the audience is largely likely to be children. The handle on source B is more delicate and ornate and easily held by an adult hand. This implies it is used for a more ceremonious and adult purpose. There you have it. 4 comparisons. Each comparison had 2 implies in them. Another way of looking at it is I've got 8 implies, 8 explanations. But remember, the explanations have to be within a comparison. So if I had an explanation about this stopper, but no explanation about why this doesn't have a stopper, that explanation would score me no marks because it wouldn't be part of a comparison. It would just stand on its own. If you want to break this down into paragraphs, then you're going to say, well, I have to have 4 paragraphs. Each one is going to compare my 2 sources and I'm going to use implies twice in each paragraph, one for source A, one for source B. I think I actually managed that. That actually makes total sense to me. Awesome! If you found that useful, give the video a like, share it with somebody, spread the love. If you want to see how it makes sense on paper, watch the rest of the video. So let's dive into the mark scheme and see if we can get some clues. This section over here that's been highlighted by the examiner gives us an idea of the types of things you could write, but there is a warning. They say this is just an indicative standard of the quality of writing. It doesn't give you the length that you would need for a full mark answer. That's not very helpful, AQA. But what you can see is they don't spend ages giving you a language analysis. The mark scheme is vague because at the top you have perceptive and detailed. But what does detailed mean? How much do you have to write? How much do you have to infer in order to be perceptive? Then if we come down to number 3, you've got to be clear and relevant. Well, fine, but how much do you have to write in order to be relevant and clear? This really is confusing for students and teachers. So what did I do? I went to AQA's secret site that's only available to teachers. You can't get it as a student, you can't get it as a parent, you can't get it as a tutor because they want to hold on to this information and make money from it. So I've written a book about it, and the way I did that is I rewrote real exam answers that students had given. I had to invent my own exam papers so that AQA couldn't accuse me of plagiarism and copyright and sue my arse. However, I based my exams very closely on the AQA exams, and the answers are very, very similar. They are identical in skills, even though they use different words. Now, by writing hundreds of exam answers in this way, I have learnt what is going to get you the grade versus what the examiners claim will get you the grade, which are two different things. So let's look at an answer in paragraphs. The first thing you can see is that there are 4 paragraphs here, but they're all of different lengths. So telling you to write in paragraphs doesn't really help. But the other problem is, when I'm reading this, how do I know if something is perceptive or if it's detailed or if it's just clear and explained? That again is totally subjective. Now the examiners say that a senior examiner can give 1 mark and any other examiner is allowed to give a mark either way. So in an 8-mark question, right, you could get the examiner saying, I think this is a 6, that's the senior examiner, but another examiner could give it a 5 and another examiner could give it a 7, and all 3 marks would still count, but only one of them would be right. So one of the problems there is writing in paragraphs allows the examiners to give you 3 different marks. So it's super important to me not to think in paragraphs. I'm going to show you what I think you should do instead. And if you don't like what I'm going to show you, because it will be different to what your teacher is saying, hey, you can just do what I do, but rearrange it into a paragraph. So I'm going to take exactly the same answer that we saw in paragraphs, and I'm going to split it up into explanations. And the explanations are highlighted with italics. So the children in source A were united in play and being able to go to the cinema. That is an explanation. 2, they had freedom, and here's the evidence. We ran and played on dirt tracks all summer. 3, they had leisure to discover 2 ways to eat these treats, balancing greed and sociability. Another explanation in italics. 4, their families could also afford to buy them all treats at Christmas. Then there's the quote to prove it. 5, they used treats as a way to make friends. So you get the idea. I'm always trying to write an explanation, and if the examiner can see I've got 8 explanations, their starting point has to be to give me 8 marks. But you will notice this answer has only 5 marks, whereas there are 8 explanations. There's only that one without an explanation in it. So why hasn't it got 8 full marks? The answer is obvious. they haven't made enough comparisons. So we can see that source B only starts at 0.7. This is a student with really rubbish exam technique. They could have got full marks. Now what happens in the real exam is students forget to compare and explain, and so they end up writing a lot more which doesn't get full marks. So for example, this was a 6-mark answer where the student actually wrote 10 things. They weren't comparing all the way through. Response 8, which was the best answer the examiners gave us, had the student writing 12 different things, 10 of them with an explanation, so there were 10 explanations, and the student only got 7 marks because not each of those explanations was a comparison. However, if you or they had set out their answer like I'm doing here, one sentence about source A, the next sentence about source B, both including a comparison, it's easy to see visually on the page that you're making that comparison with your explanations, and therefore the examiner needs to give you the mark. You would know you'd only have to do this 4 times to get full marks, and you'd say to yourself, hey, that's easy to do in my time limit. I can even have time to add in an extra comparison with 2 explanations, just in case any of my explanations were rubbish. Now remember, this is not something that your teachers are telling you because they haven't read hundreds of exam answers and they haven't written dozens of exam answers as I have to try and understand what actually gets the marks. This is what actually gets the marks. But remember what I said at the beginning, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, you can just go back to putting all this information into paragraphs and not number them at all. However, you won't know if you're writing enough to get full marks. If you number them like this, you will know that you've written enough to get full marks. You make the choice, it's your exam. If you're wondering how to get top marks in question 3, and I hope you are, that is the video coming up next.